Hey there, Mr. Reddit here. Welcome back to another episode of r/entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Karen thinks she's a celebrity after going on Dr. Phil. After that, Karen neighbor tried to fight me and the cops. She got arrested. And after that, Karen demands my seat, insisting she had reserved it. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen does not get to go on Dr. Phil. I'd prefer Mari, to be honest. So please smash that like button and subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Karen thinks she's a celebrity after going on Dr. Phil. Every so often, we get a celebrity in the restaurant. I've never really been there when it's happened. We're not too far from our city's main concert venue, but the owner still has a strict no comping meals for anyone based on star power policy that we're all apprised of when we're hired. His logic being, it'll start as just one exception and turn into all sorts of D-listers sniffing around looking for an ego boost. Ironically, this has never been a problem because the one or two times we've had real celebrities in, they've never expected a free meal. They've paid and tipped well. It's only the D-listers who act all shocked when the check comes. But we almost never get them either, so it's really no big deal. Until last week. We're located right by my college, and a girl who attends my college was recently on the Dr. Phil show. She was not a featured guest. She did not even appear in person. She was just teleconferenced in for like 3 minutes total to weigh in on the featured guests, a friend of hers from high school, I think, relationship. But because she was on TV, she thought she was the hottest thing to have ever happened on campus. I had heard a few people joking about how she was going around telling everyone that she was a celebrity and how she kept expecting people to recognize her. It sounded really cringy and terrible. But I don't know her. I hadn't even seen the show, so what did I care? It was fun gossip for 10 seconds, but I quickly forgot about it. However, this girl's self-absorption wasn't completely baseless. There are a lot more students on the campus than usual this summer because so many took gap semesters to avoid Zoom school during lockdown. Not much is happening around here as we ease back into normal life, so people did get unreasonably excited about someone from our school being on national TV. So she was sort of being treated like a celebrity. She was getting a lot of special attention. She even got some free things on campus and had some people ask to take a photo with her, in an ironic sense, but she didn't understand that. So she decided to start testing the waters off campus, and I guess met with some success because most of the nearby businesses are staffed with students. She soon appeared in our restaurant. She was a nightmare from the moment she stepped in the door. I didn't recognize her at first, but it all clicked as she was demanding a 4-top despite being a party of 1. We were okay with it only because we weren't especially busy. She didn't make eye contact with her server. She wasn't my section, but I ate up every second of her visit with us once I realized who she was. The first thing I heard her say after the server said hi and introduced himself was, "Menu, water, new fork," like she was writing out a list. Her server was only just bumped up from trainee status, and he's barely 16, so it especially sucked that she was dumped on him. He's incredibly shy and sweet. If I had anticipated the crab storm that blew in with her, I would have swapped with him. But this all happened pretty quickly, and I'll usually do anything to avoid serving classmates I don't like. It's rare I don't like a classmate I haven't met, but there's a first time for everything. Of course, nothing on our menu was acceptable to her as is. She had to get a ton of substitutions and additions. Even her side salad of mixed greens had to be, not kidding, unmixed. She wanted each lettuce, but separately on the plate. Her server explained that the greens came pre-mixed, but she just stared blankly past him and went, "So, separated," as though it were the most obvious thing ever. The kitchen actually accommodated all of her requests because it was a really slow day and there were easy enough solutions to each thing, but she still sent at least one of her plates back. In the 20 or so minutes it took for her food to come out, she asked us how much longer it would take 4 times. She demanded we change the music we had on to a playlist of hers instead. She made comments about the lighting. By the time she was finished eating, we were seconds away from throwing her out. He asked if everything was all right and if she needed anything else. She said no, so he said he'd be right back with the check. I could tell from her face, even as far away as I was, that she wasn't expecting a check. She looked all sour and twisted. I was dying internally. It was so satisfying. But then she stood up and calmly just walked right out of the door. I wasn't sure what I was seeing at first. I thought maybe she had gone to get her wallet from her car or something, but this isn't the kind of place where a lot of people drive, and I just knew in my gut I had to follow up with her because her server definitely wouldn't. I went out the door, and yep, she was traipsing down the street, tapping away on her phone like nothing was wrong in the world. I called out to her, and she half turned around, then realizing I was from the restaurant, tried to pretend she hadn't heard me and went right back to her walking, quickening her pace a little. I would have laughed if I wasn't so upset. So I jogged to catch up with her and was trying to keep the situation nice and calm and allow her to save as much face as possible, and was just like, "Oh, hi, sorry, there's just still the matter of the bill," knowing darn well she didn't forget, but figuring confronting her would just feed into unnecessary drama. She looks at me in total disbelief and says she was going to Instagram her meal with us, and that's typically enough when she goes out, without a hint of sarcasm or embarrassment. So I did know who she was because her reaction to being on TV was such a laughingstock on campus. But, and maybe this was a little mean, but I couldn't resist. I went, "Sorry, who are you?" And she lost it, insisting I knew exactly who she was and that I was just jealous of her, and that, wait for it, that's why I was forcing her to pay for the food she ordered at the restaurant. I didn't want to be gratuitously mean, so rather than antagonize further, though it was very low-hanging fruit, I just told her, "Look, if you don't plan to pay, we'll have to involve the police." She laughed and said, "Well, if you don't know who I am, you won't be able to find me, right?" Honestly, she had me there, but I didn't need to admit to her that I really knew who she was, because for all she knew, we had security cameras or would just describe her really well. So I let her walk off, and I went back to the restaurant and called the police. It was absurdly easy to track her down because I did know who she was, and she was posting geotagged posts online all day, including a super angry post about how she had eaten at our restaurant and it had been terrible. That positive mention had never happened, by the way, not that it would have gotten her out of paying, but still. So she incriminated herself and led the police right to her. I doubt the cops would have followed up so diligently if it were only us, but apparently she had walked out on a couple of other places that genuinely didn't recognize her and expected her to pay up, and posted angrily about how the businesses sucked, further incriminating herself. They didn't know who she was, but they described her well enough, and that paired with the post was enough for the police to drag her in. Our trainee server actually had to go down somewhere and identify her. He was terrified when he was first asked, but when he came back, he was totally giddy and thought that the whole experience was pretty cool. At least cooler than working his shift. So I wish I had been at work the time John Goodman was here instead, but this was better than nothing. Karen neighbor tried to fight me and the cops. She got arrested. This story begins with myself and my dog in the backyard, to which we had been banished because the inside of my house was being painted. Dogs and wet paint are a thing that do not mix well at all, and bath time for my pupper is akin to all-out war. While we were outside, spending time waiting for the house to be dog safe again, I discovered I very much had to go to the bathroom, and since my backyard is pretty well secluded and only visible really from above or by someone who's way up into my yard, I decided to go then and there. After the sigh of satisfaction, and before the stream had finished, I heard a very high-pitched whining sound, and when I looked up to see what the sound was, I saw a quad-rotor drone floating above my backyard, presumably watching me. I don't really have a shy bladder, so I finished what I was doing, put myself away, and went back to my regularly scheduled dog entertainment programming. Later that day, after dinner, there was a knock on my door, and upon opening it, I saw a very uncomfortable-looking police officer. He asked if I could step outside to speak with him, and I did so. He then asked me if I had urinated in my yard recently, and when I raised an eyebrow and sort of looked at him like, "Seriously?" He clarified that someone had called in and reported me for doing so, and the report has to be investigated since I live so close to a school. Close as the crow flies, there's a patch of swamp between my house and the school that is not easily navigatable. With a car, it's closer to a mile to actually get there. I confirmed that I had and showed the officer where I'd done so, and then told him that the only people that had seen me was my dog and someone flying a drone over my backyard, and I was reasonably sure my dog hadn't phoned the police on me. The officer thanked me for my explanation and said I very likely was not in trouble, but he would take it as a favor if I just used the toilet for the time being. The next day, my dog was in the dog run by himself, sun-worshipping while I was working. I had the door open in case he started barking at neighbors or what have you. Suddenly, he looses his fiercest war cry and starts making distress noises. I look outside to see what's going on, and there's a quad rotor buzzing around my dog run, tormenting my poor dog. I do what anyone would do in that situation and grab my hose, set the nozzle to anti-aircraft, high-pressure jet for the uninitiated, and zap the drone with the hose. Drone ceases operation and falls to the ground in my dog run. It had been chewed on a little bit before I reclaimed the thing, but it seemed fine. I took my dog and the drone inside and figured I'd hear from someone sooner or later. About an hour later, my doorbell rings, and there's a 12 or 13-year-old kid on my steps with a bike helmet on and his bike thrown into my garden. I ask him if I can help him, and he demands I return his drone. I ask him why I should, when all he's done with it in my experience is harass me. He starts foot stomping and throwing a shrieking tantrum my cousin, who is 7, had grown out of throwing many moons ago, demanding I give the drone back now. He actually concluded with, "And that's final." I found that frankly adorable and started laughing. I told him to come back with a parent if he really wanted the drone back, because he's not capable of acting like a grown-up for this conversation, and went back into my house. The kid actually tried, and failed, to destroy some of my garden before picking his bike back up and going home. Around 6 that evening, there's another knock at the door, and the kid's back with a man who's a little bit older than I am. I think he knew his kid was full of it because he sheepishly asked me if I had robbed his son and stolen his drone. I smirked a little bit at this and told him exactly what his son had done with that drone and how it happened to come into my possession. His face couldn't decide between chagrin and fury, and he turns and asks his son if this is really what had happened. His son just starts bawling because he knows he's caught, and the dad says, "When I bought you that drone, I said there was one rule. You don't bother people with the drone." The dad apologizes on his son's behalf and says I can keep it. The kid emits a squawk of indignation and fury and says, "I'm telling Mom." There's a bit of a scuffle between them while the dad wrangles him back into the vehicle they arrived in, and then the dad comes back and gives me a cell number with instructions to text him if his ex-wife should darken my doorstep. I said I would and waved goodbye, mostly to upset the kid because the twerp had it coming. A few days later, around lunchtime, I heard an ominous bang sound, followed shortly after by pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. As I got closer to the door, I could hear high-pitched shrieking, and I connected some dots. Before opening the door, I found the drone dad contacted my phone and texted, "I think she's here." Then I opened my door and was greeted with the sight of an extremely irate, slightly younger than usual, Karen. When the woman sees me, she starts screaming at me for stealing from her precious boy, and how I'm just the worst human being to grace the face of the earth in her estimation. She's got quite the head of steam worked up, and I can see almost immediately that I'm not allowed to talk. So I decide to pour gasoline on the fire and send up a follow-up text. "I can see why you got a divorce." Right when I hit send, this lady slaps the phone out of my hand and onto the ground and demands I look at her while she's talking to me. I go for a non sequitur and say, "At me?" This startles the Karen long enough for me to clarify. "Talking at me? This isn't a conversation." It's worth noting that it was about 12:30 p.m. and this lady had Merlot breath so strong I felt like I was getting a buzz just by being yelled at her. She lets out a squawk and starts to puff up like a blowfish, readying another verbal salvo, when I held up a finger, stooped to grab my phone, and then speed dial the police, non-emergency line on my phone, because it's pretty obvious how this is going to go. When she demands to know who I'm calling, I tell her calmly that I'm calling the police. Her response was, and this is a direct quote, "Good. Let's see how the cops deal with a weasel like you who steals from kids." The operator actually heard that, and bless this woman's heart, she actually said, "I think I understand the nature of your call. Can you give me the address where this is happening?" I did, and the operator thanked me and said a response was on the way. While I was talking to the operator, I got a reply from the dad. "Oh God, tell me she's not drunk." Deciding I didn't need my phone slapped out of my hand again, I just sent a thumbs down reply to the text and settled in to get yelled at incoherently until backup arrived. It wasn't all that long, maybe 5 minutes total before the boys in blue showed up. It wasn't until they pulled up that I noticed this lady had missed my driveway and actually winged my mailbox pulling up into my lawn. The police separated us, and I actually wound up talking to the cop who urged me to use the toilet like a civilized human being. I tell my side of the story, and then the officer I was talking to goes to assist the other officer who is trying to figure out what Karen was going on about because she's getting steadily more belligerent and violent. She winds up slapping one of them and trying to bite the other before she's restrained and bundled into the back of one of their cruisers. At this point, the dad has pulled up and looks completely aghast, but he does confirm my side of the story with the police. The officers thank me and the dad for our time and promise a tow truck is coming for her vehicle. And they put their heads together and do police things, and the dad leaves to go do whatever it was he was doing before Karen reared her ugly head. I did get the last laugh though. While the police were filling out forms, or whatever it is police do after a horror show like this, I zipped into my house and grabbed the slightly chewed and no longer damp drone. Making sure Karen was watching, I sauntered over to my trash cans and tipped the piece of junk in and dusted my hands off before walking back inside. I had already confirmed the drone was broken from getting hosed. I was going to throw it out either way. This just made me happy. Karen demands my seat, insisting she had reserved it. I posted last night about an encounter I'd had with a neckbeard who tapped me on the shoulder, asked me if I was single, and then flipped out when I said no. I mentioned that I had dealt with a Karen not 20 minutes before that and would post that story if folks were interested. So here it is. In my other post, I explained that I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic disorder affecting collagen. Among many other symptoms, it tends to make people look significantly younger than we are. So although I'm 32 years old, I'm often mistaken for being a teenager. I dress in a very goth and punk style, which I'm sure probably adds to that. EDS often causes something called POTS, which in simple terms means that being upright causes my heart rate to increase and my blood pressure to decrease, and the longer I'm standing, the worse it gets. If I'm standing for too long, I black out. I take medication that helps a lot, but I've had to stop taking it in order to get my shots, so my heart rate and blood pressure are completely uncontrolled at the moment. So I just arrived at my local shopping mall and got hit with a wave of dizziness, which is a surefire sign that I need to sit down before I fall down. There were 3 armchairs together for customers to use, and I sat down in one of them that had an abandoned, empty shopping trolley next to it. The other 2 seats were occupied. I checked my numbers with the blood pressure monitor I carry with me, and they were pretty bad. Blood pressure of 105/68 and heart rate of 138. So I downed a few salt tablets and started scrolling through Reddit on my phone while I waited for things to improve. About 2 minutes later, the wild Karen appeared. ETA, Karen matched the stereotype in every conceivable way and looked to be about 45 to 50 years old. She marched over and barked at me to get out of her seat, claiming she had clearly left her trolley next to it to reserve it. I told her that the seats are there for everyone's use, and people leave empty trolleys all over the shopping center, so that really didn't mean anything. During previous disputes about seating, I've sometimes told people I couldn't move away because of my blood pressure and heart rate condition, but it's never seemed to help the situation and it's none of their business, so I don't tend to mention it unless it's genuinely necessary. Karen, hand on hip, said she didn't ask for my idiot opinions, and that when an adult tells me to jump, the only acceptable response is, "How high?" I laughed and said, "Lady, I'm 32 years old, and I don't answer to you. Leave me the heck alone." She scoffed and said, "BS, don't you dare lie to me. Where the heck are your parents?" I said that's none of her darn business and stop harassing me because I'm not moving. As I was saying this, an older man vacated one of the other armchairs with a groan and an eye roll. You and me both, mate. So I gestured to it and said, "There you go, Karen. There's a free seat right there. Happy now?" Karen folded her arms with an entirely misplaced air of superiority and said, "That's your seat. This one is mine, and you are going to move, young lady." Entirely done with her crap, I laughed and said a simple, "No," going back to my phone. At this point, she pretty much lost it. She shouted, "Get out of my chair!" and kicked the side of the seat so hard that it made me jump. As I responded with a stunned, "Wow, you're legitimately crazy, aren't you?" A member of the cleaning staff took notice and came over. She told Karen to calm down and asked me if I needed her to call security. I was going to say, "Yes, please," but Karen jumped in and snapped, "Please do." And then to me, "I would love to see security drag you out by your rear." He must have been nearby because a security guard quickly appeared and asked me what the problem was. Of course, Karen again jumped in and started telling him that this little brat pushed me out of my seat, stole it from me, and how it was clearly hers because that's my trolley right there. The security guard turned to me and asked if that was what had happened. I said, actually, like I told her, I'm 32 years old and she didn't show up until after I'd sat down. She said she had reserved the seat, and I told her that's not how it works. She's been harassing me to get me to move, and your colleague here saw her shouting and kicking the chair. Karen gasped and with an accusational finger pointed at me and shouted, "You lying little jerk!" But the cleaner backed me up. The security guard calmly told Karen that she can't claim or reserve seats she's not using, and that if she wanted to sit down, there were now 2 free seats right there. The third person now had also left. Karen went red in the face and barked back, "Listen here, you will make her move, or I will be having words with your manager." The security guard sighed and told Karen that she had 2 options. Either she could walk away now, leave me alone, and be allowed to go on with her day, or he would be escorting her off of the shopping mall. Surprisingly, Karen actually went with a third option. She scoffed and stammered and eventually opted to shout about how unbelievable this all was, and that she was going to the center management's office to get security guard and the cleaner fired right now, and stormed off, without her empty trolley of course. The security guard let her leave, and unfortunately, I don't know what happened with her after that point. The security guard apologized to me for her behavior, and I told him it wasn't his fault, and that I was sorry he and the cleaner had to deal with crap like that too. He excused himself, saying he should probably follow her to make sure she made it to the center's management office without any further incidents along the way, and I chatted with the cleaner for a bit about how ridiculous and childish people can be. She told me this was far from the worst or weirdest she had seen, and that I wouldn't believe the crap that some people do, but didn't elaborate. A plus side was that the whole situation had aided in increasing my blood pressure, so I sat there for about another 10 minutes to let my heart rate level out, and was then able to get up and carry on with my day. If I see that security guard while I'm at the shops this afternoon, I'll be sure to ask him what happened and update this post. The time I was accused of the federal crime of deactivating a customer's card. I had just got in for the day and had to cover Riley at self-checkout, first 15. So I dismiss her, and a few moments later I see a blinker and go to help. Me, "How may I help you, ma'am?" Customer, "My card isn't working." Me, "Okay, what's the error message you keep getting?" "It just won't accept my card." "Okay, I'll reset the card reader and then we can try it again." So I created a suspend slip and tried to rescan the transaction into the machine, but of course the slip didn't work. She only had 7 items, so I quickly re-rang up her items and compared the totals to make sure everything was scanned correctly. Me, "Okay, that'll be 3209. "That's the wrong total. You double scanned." I then double check again that the totals are the same from the suspend slip, then go back and look at the sales screen, and everything is only rung up once. Me, "Sorry ma'am, but there's no item listed twice, and all items that are scanned are in your bag. Is there something you'd like me to remove?" Karen, "No, ring it up again. This time I'll keep an eye on you." So I scan everything again and get the exact same total. Me, "Your total will be 3209. "The machine is wrong. That's not the correct total." To my luck, but not my supervisor's, he just happened to be passing through, and I needed to try and de-escalate the situation, and I figured I should pass her up before she gets more upset, and ask my boss to ring her out quickly, and he agrees and gets the same total as me. Karen, "The lipstick was $3, not $6. Our company policy is to just change the price if it's not a significant loss, so he just changed the price of the lipstick. Supervisor, "Okay, sorry about that, ma'am. Your total will be $28.88. Karen, "That's better." So she tries to pay again, and once again her card declines. When a card declines, there are multiple reasons for it, and we don't assume it's just because the card doesn't have enough funds. So we try to go through the list, but she's very defensive, and none of the other ways make any difference. So we tell her she just has to contact the card provider to see why the card isn't working. She, however, believes that I have broken her card and starts screaming that at the top of her lungs. "She broke my card." Supervisor, "Ma'am, she didn't." "If only I had kept a better eye on her. Have her turn out my pockets and give me my money back." I'm still at the self-checkout and can hear her screaming, and so can the other customers who are turning their heads to look at the scene she's now causing. Karen, "I have a disability, and this is a government-issued crime, messing with the card. It's a federal crime." My supervisor tries to tell her that I didn't steal her money and that I can't deactivate her card, and that she just needs to contact the card issuer regarding any details of why her transaction won't go through. "It was working this morning. She broke it, and that's a federal crime." Supervisor, "Since it wasn't working at the self-checkout either, you may have an insufficient balance or a fraud alert on your card." "No, I have enough money. She must have charged at the self-checkout because I know how much money I have, and it's enough. I wasn't paying attention to what she was doing because I had to look away since she had bad breath." Supervisor, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask that you calm down. We can try your card again, or you can pay another way." It's a federal crime. She ended up leaving without her items, and not too long later, Riley returned from her 15, blissfully unaware of the craziness that she had barely missed. HOA Board campaigned to do nothing. I lived in a small, 18-house neighborhood that had a deed-restricted HOA. We had a minimal common area along the main entry street that needed maintenance and some drainage infrastructure that needed to be maintained. Not much work had to be done at all. No one wanted to be on the board, so I ran for the board with the slogan, "I will do nothing more than is legally required to fulfill the legal requirements of the HOA." This slogan was enough to get 4 more neighbors to run with the same slogan. We had the typical committees, all with the same members and with the same idea. Leave everyone alone, fulfill our legal obligations, and move on. I was walking down the street one day and was accosted by a neighbor who said, "You don't deserve to be president." I replied, "You're right, I don't deserve it." This really set her off, so she started yelling at me about all the things I should be doing, planting a specific kind of flower, forcing her neighbors to do things unregulated by the HOA, etc. So I invited her to run for president. I told her that she could submit a petition calling for a special election, and I could guarantee that everyone on the board would sign it and probably vote for her to take on the job. This, of course, just infuriated her, so she started writing letters to the board complaining about everything. We ignored the letters, which technically was a mistake. Our HOA documents required all letters to receive a response. She continued to send letters that had nothing to do with the HOA, so we crafted a malicious compliance response that read, "Thank you for your letter to the HOA board. After careful consideration, we have decided to ignore it." We then included instructions on how to call for a special election to have us kicked off the board and promised her the support of all of our board members if she chooses to circulate the required petition. She sold her house and moved. Our board continued with the same philosophy for the 12 years I lived there. Nothing more than legally required, and leave everyone else the heck alone. We would hold a homeowners meeting once a year, which was nothing more than a potluck dinner. We had to invite someone from the compliance company who worked for us to make sure we covered everything required for our annual meeting and reporting, and we would always have an agenda item under new business. Does everyone promise to be a reasonable adult? I've moved to a new 14-house neighborhood with an HOA. I haven't yet decided if I'll run for the board. Edit to answer a common question. Why not dissolve the HOA? An HOA was required for a planned community, which was the type of community in which we lived. Planned communities are built under specific laws and regulations, and one of the requirements is that they have an HOA. In order to disband or form an HOA, you have to have unanimity of all proper owners. Typically, the HOA is created by the builder, so when people buy the house in a planned community, they're buying into the HOA. It's a deed restriction. Assuming we could get the unanimity required to disband the HOA, we would still have the problem that the HOA, as a legal corporation, owned common areas, property owned equally by all homeowners, and we had common infrastructure, a drainage system. Someone would have to have been able to take ownership of that property and the resulting liability, pretty much an impossibility. That drainage system only benefited the homeowners, and it made sense that it be owned by the community, thus the need for the HOA. Am I the jerk for cutting a family member off from a trust fund? 2 years ago, I won a considerable sum in the lottery. Not a scratch-off, the real lottery. So, the tune of many millions of dollars. My state does not allow anonymity, and I have many relatives who are less than financially responsible. I knew if I didn't do something, I'd spend the rest of my life being badgered, so I set up a trust for my extended family with a good chunk. How it works is, if family has an emergency, they call the trustee and ask for funds, and they assess the need, and they give them the money if it meets the terms set in the trust. It's to be used in situations like someone being behind in bills, medical debt, unexpected car repairs, etc. It's to help them get through tough times or major life events, not for vacations or luxury purchases. One of my cousins, let's call him Dale, applied for $75,000 for a brand new loaded pickup truck. He was denied. This was neither an emergency nor was it necessary, as he had a perfectly fine vehicle. They offered $5,000 to help with a down payment and taxes, and he accepted and bought the truck. This was 6 months ago. The trustee brought to my attention today that Dale has never made a payment of his own for the truck. He waits 2 months until he's behind and then applies for help. The first 2 times they gave him the benefit of the doubt, but now that it's happened a third, they're rightfully suspicious. I told them to advise Dale that he can no longer get assistance for his truck payment and to get him some information on how to return it if he cannot afford it, and that we would help, within reason, get him a much cheaper vehicle that he could afford. Well, this morning his sister, Jessie, sent me a screenshot of a post he made on Facebook, basically bashing me, calling me a selfish jerk, and ending with stating he can't wait until I pass so he can inherit millions. Not sure why he thinks that. Most of the money will go to my parents and then the trust, along with a few charities, and dance on my grave. I have decided to revoke Dale's access to the trust completely. I don't feel comfortable subsidizing the lifestyle of someone who is actively hoping for my passing. Jesse feels bad now for sharing the post and is asking me to reconsider. Dale is fuming, and my aunt has said some choice words leading me to wonder if I'm the jerk. Dale's father agrees with my decision, but many of our family is split. What do you think? Edit. Thank you all for your words. I know it's hard to understand why I even set up the trust to begin with, but I grew up an only child, so I've been extremely close with my cousins and consider their kids and my nieces and nephews and them to be the closest thing I've had to brothers and sisters, so I don't want to see them struggle in life if I know I can prevent it without setting myself on fire. But I also am not the most objective person when it comes to them, so I created the trust and appointed a trustee to make the hard, level-headed decisions. Dale is the first one to even attempt to take advantage. The others have requested funds during the lockdown to help with necessities like mortgage payments and food, and so far, 2 of my nieces were given some money to help with school. The fact that he tried scamming and taking advantage of something meant to help the whole family hurt worse than the Facebook post, honestly.
Huge shout out to our newest official channel member, S Butterfly. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, it really means the world to us. Click this button to join as a member today and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
Or come watch this video next, you're gonna love it.